like to welcome everyone to a special program to celebrate Juneteenth in the town of Carrboro. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. By March 1865, millions of Black slaves in the South were informed that slavery had ended. However, 250,000 slaves in Texas continued to labor under the institution until June 19, 1865, when General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and issued General Order Number 3, which stated that all slaves were free. Slaves across Texas sang, danced, and prayed when they received the news of their freedom. It was the day of their jubilee. Today, we will be joined by Black elected officials from across Orange County. We will hear from some of those elected officials as they read a proclamation recognizing Juneteenth in Orange County. We will then recognize all past and present Black elected officials who have served citizens across all jurisdictions represented in the county. Finally, we will be joined by Dr. Freddie Parker, Professor Emeritus of History at North Carolina Central University, as he will discuss the Emancipation Proclamation, Blacks in the Civil War, and give a history of Juneteenth celebrations. And now, I am pleased to welcome Renée Price, Vice Chair of the Board of County Commissioners for Orange County, to begin the reading of the Orange County Juneteenth Proclamation. Commissioner Price.
Thank you. Since August 2019, we have been acknowledging the 400-year history since our ancestors arrived on these shores in America. So today, as we celebrate our freedom, we remember and share this resolution. A resolution in recognition of 400 years of the African American story.
Whereas the first documentation of the arrival of Africans to the Virginia colony was recorded by John Rolfe, wherein he stated, about the latter end of August, a Dutch man of war of the burden of 160 tuns arrived at Point Comfort. The commander's name was Captain Job. His pilot for the West Indies, one Mr. Marmaduke, an Englishman. He bought not anything but 20 and odd Negroes, which the governor of Cape Merchant brought for victuals. And
whereas, thus on August 20th, 1619, 20 or so Angolans, having been kidnapped from their homeland, shackled and transported across the Atlantic Ocean, disembarked a corsair, the White Lion, at Port Comfort, today known as Hampton, Virginia, and the Virginia colony as enslaved people. And
whereas, this point in history essentially marks the beginning of the American slave trade and the American slave system, which became one of the most brutal and heinous economic institutions known to mankind. And
whereas August 2019 marks the 400-year anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans to the shores of the New World that is now the United States of America. And
whereas for 4 centuries, Black African and African American people have withstood persecution, oppression, prejudice, discrimination, and racialized terror while laboring in the cotton fields, rice paddies, tobacco fields, plantation houses, and steel factories. And
whereas our story is filled with tears and anguish from intense suffering and sacrifice, yet and still our story is one abounding in faith, hope, and peace for all humankind.
Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, the current and former African American elected leaders in Orange County, North Carolina, being descendants of enslaved and free Black Africans and African Americans, have a legacy that we shall uphold and a heritage that we shall honor, and
be it resolved that we, the African American elected officials in Orange County, do hereby pledge to continue the fight for civil rights and human rights that began 400 years ago, despite resistance, violence, and discriminatory legislation or court decisions. And
be it resolved that we, the current and former African American elected officials, shall endeavor to disrupt the intergenerational cycles of poverty, marginalization, and disenfranchisement that disproportionately have affected African Americans, resulting in the denial of opportunities for educational, economic, and political advancement. And
be it further resolved that we, the daughters and sons of Black Africa, pledge to break the chains and handcuffs of bondage by working to reform the criminal justice system that traditionally has targeted people of color unfairly and unjustly. And
be it moreover resolved that we, the current and former African American elected officials in the Orange County, North Carolina community, as we pay tribute to our ancestors and to our posterity, pledge to sustain the fight for freedom, equality, and justice as we go forward into the next 400 years. This, the 19th day of June 2020, signed by
Joel H. Brown,
Alan Kwabena-Boinsi,
Ronnie Dossie,
Barbara Foushee,
Valerie P. Foushee,
Matthew Hughes,
Tony McKnight,
Renee Price,
Beverly Scarlett, along with Carl R. Fox,
Brenda Stevens.
Dion Timney.
On behalf of former African American elected officials, Donna Bell, Deborah Brooks, Lavonda Burnett, Hilliard Caldwell, Moses Carey, Elizabeth Carter, Kevin Chavis, Keith Cook, Bob Drakeford, and myself, Jean Hamilton.
Francis Dancy Burton, Eddie Eubanks, Braxton Foushee, Joseph Green, Horace Johnson, Michelle Johnson, Howard Lee, Brian Lowett, James Merritt, and myself, Greg McElveen.
Ted Parrish, Mark Royster, Ruth Royster, Lawrence Sanders, Ed Sechrist, Dolores Simpson, Richard Simpson, Edith Wiggins, Teresa Williams, and myself, Annetta Streeter.
And in memoriam, we remember Henry Anderson III, Frederick Battle, Barbara Booth Powell, Edwin Caldwell, Wilson Swain Caldwell, Reverend J.R. Manley, Hubert Robinson, R.D. Smith, Bill Thorpe, Roosevelt Warner, Richard E. Whitted, Roosevelt Wilkerson, Rosa Williams, and B. Willis Wilson.
Thank you, everyone. We're pleased to have Dr. Freddie Parker join us today to give a presentation on the history of Juneteenth. Dr. Parker was born and reared in Hillsborough, North Carolina. He received the BA in History from North Carolina Central University in 1975, the MA in History from NCCU in 1977, and the PhD in American History from UNC Chapel Hill in 1987. He is currently Professor Emeritus of History at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. He taught American, African American, and African history at North Carolina Central University for 39 years. He is author of the books, Running for Freedom, Slave Runaways in North Carolina, 1775 to 1840, and Stealing a Little Freedom, Advertisements for Slave Runaways in North Carolina, 1791 to 1840. On November 19, 2008, Dr. Parker was appointed by Governor Mike Easley to the then newly created African American Heritage Commission. In January 2011, Governor Beverly Perdue appointed him chair of the commission. He was appointed by Governor Mike Easley to the North Carolina Historical Commission in 2001 and reappointed in 2007. He is past chairman of the North Carolina Historical Highway Marker Commission. Currently, he is a member of the board of the African American History Project Advisory Board at Tryon Palace in New Bern, a member of the Historical Society of North Carolina and the North Carolina Society. He appeared on several PBS and BBC television specials, including Why Celebrate Juneteenth, Reparations for Slavery, Blacks in Civil War, North Carolina, Blacks in Reconstruction, North Carolina, Slavery in North Carolina, The Residual Effects of Slavery, and Slavery in the Making of America for the University of North Carolina Center for Public Television, and The Gospel Truth for the British Broadcasting Company. In 2013, Dr. Parker received the Christopher Crittenden Award for his career contributions to the historical profession in North Carolina. He is a recipient of the UNC Board of Governors Excellence in Teaching Award and a member of the Phi Alpha Theta History Honor Society and the Pi Gamma Mu International Honor Society in the social sciences. And now it is my pleasure to present and welcome Dr. Freddie Parker.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barbara Foushee, for the kind introduction. I'm happy again to be with the good folks of Carrboro and Orange County people in general as we commemorate one phase of the ending of slavery in 1865. And I say again, one phase of the ending of slavery in 1865. Juneteenth Celebration 2020, the 155th anniversary of the ending of slavery in the United States. And folks are asking the same question they asked in 1865. Where do we go from here? I can talk about Juneteenth 1865 today by starting with the discussion of what is happening in America and around the world today. Because surely we would be remiss if we did not weave the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, and many others into a history of racial terror and a blatant disregard for the Black body, this physical, visible agent that we call Black, the color Black. Hatred, discrimination, terror, and torture are based solely on the color of the skin. And so the racial terror and general discrimination today is the continuation of a theme that is buried in the extraction of millions of Africans from the continent and brought to the American shores and enslaved. It is deeply buried in the enslavement of those millions throughout the New World. The massacre of 150 Blacks in Colfax, Louisiana in 1873, just 8 years after the ending of slavery. Wilmington, North Carolina, massacre in 1898, resulting in the slaughter of dozens of Blacks, possibly hundreds. The Atlanta race riot of 1906 resulted in the death of dozens of Blacks. Well over 100 Blacks killed in Elaine, Arkansas in September 1919. And there's Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, and the nerve of the President of the United States to go into Tulsa next week on Juneteenth to rally his troops. And what about Rosewood in 1923? But not only did massacres occur in the South, but during what has been labeled the Red Summer of 1919, race riots occurred in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Syracuse, New York, and Chicago, Illinois. And so it is a situation where the beat goes on. Any discussion of Juneteenth has to start with the discussion of the events of 1862, the year that President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That year was filled with discussions and debates about the status of enslaved people and the 500,000 free Black people who lived in the United States at that time. And that discussion centered around whether Blacks would be allowed to live in the United States if freed, or sent to a place or places outside the United States if freed. The general sentiment was that freed people should be sent to other parts of the world. Where? Liberia, Panama, New Granada, even Haiti. In April 1862, Congress passed the District of Columbia Emancipation Act, which provided compensation for the emancipation of Washington, D.C.'s approximately 3,000 enslaved people, and for an appropriation of $100,000 to fund the settlement of those individuals to, quote, the republics of Haiti or Liberia, or such other country beyond the limits of the United States as the president may determine. In the summer of 1862, Congress appropriated another $500,000 for the purpose of immigrating freed slaves to places outside the United States. President Lincoln himself favored the immigration of Blacks from the United States. As early as 1854, Mr. Lincoln shared publicly his views about the colonization of those enslaved people who may become free. And he let it be known that he did not believe in racial equality. He believed that Blacks and whites could not coexist in the United States because of the history of Black enslavement. As he drafted the Emancipation Proclamation in the summer of 1862, Lincoln pondered with the best course of action. So on August 17, 1862, he assembled a delegation of 5 Black leaders in Washington, D.C. They met with the president, and he said to them, quote, "You and we are different races, and it was better for us both to be separated." James Mitchell, who was Lincoln's colonization agent, was responsible for pulling these delegates together. These 5 men were highly educated, as the president pointed out. They were men who had what he called outstanding backgrounds. They were men who were different than the masses of Black people. They were John F. Cook Jr., Benjamin McCoy, Edward Thomas, John T. Costin, and Cornelius Clark. President Lincoln appealed to the delegation to go back to their communities and impress upon Blacks the importance of colonizing outside the United States. Blacks had long fought against colonization to Africa or any other place. They fought the efforts of the American Colonization Society, founded in 1816, whose primary goal was to encourage free Blacks to immigrate from the United States to somewhere else. Some members of the delegation favored immigration, but most Blacks in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country did not. We come to the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed on September 22nd, 1862, just about a month after that meeting with that Black delegation. It was signed September 26, 1862, and it was designed to go into effect January 1st, 1863. The mistake that we often make is that we believe that the Emancipation Proclamation was designed to free Blacks. It was not. It was an order designed to show strength to the Confederates. It was issued after the Battle of Antietam that occurred on September 17, 1862. The North claimed victory, so this was the time to issue the proclamation. Lincoln, in effect, told the South to put down your arms. I will give you 100 days between September 22nd, 1862, and January 1st, 1863, to put down your arms. If not, the proclamation will go into effect. Let's just say that the South had surrendered on November 1st, 1862. Would slavery have come to an end? Don't know what the president would have done, but surely it was not designed to bring slavery to an end. So no one was freed as a result of this preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Black folks remained enslaved until the war ended in 1865. Lincoln said, I will do whatever it takes to preserve the Union. If it means freeing all slaves, I'll do that. If it means freeing some and leaving others, I will do that. Or if it means freeing none, I will do that. From the inception, the Civil War was not fought to end slavery. The ending of slavery happened to have been a consequence of the war. Make no mistake about it now, slavery was the cause of the Civil War, despite cries to the contrary. Slavery was the hub around which sub-causes revolved. Southern states seceded to protect the institution of slavery. Everybody says slavery was not the cause of the war. Well, one good way to find out what may have been the cause of the war is to simply read each Southern state's ordinance of secession. That clears it up pretty clearly. So when we talk about Juneteenth or June 19th, the day that Union soldiers, as Ms. Foushee pointed out, led by Major General Gordon Granger, landed at Galveston, Texas, with news that the war had ended and that enslaved were now free. It must be understood that 4 million enslaved people were just freed prior to the executive order being read by the general. There were approximately 183,000 enslaved people in Texas in 1865. This indeed was their day of Jubilee. The day of Jubilee arrived at different times for different enslaved people based on where they were in the United States. Texas happens to have been the farthest from the eastern portion of the United States, and so they got that word later than everybody else. Blacks across the country began celebrating emancipation Day or Juneteenth or Freedom Day annually, marked with church services and festivals and Jean Canoe parades, food, games, storytellers, history lessons, and much more. We continue the tradition today. The state of Texas made it official. On January 1st, 1980, Juneteenth became an official state holiday in Texas. Al Edwards, a Black state legislator, led those efforts. The executive order ending slavery was just that. It was an executive order. An amendment was necessary so that a future president would not undo what President Lincoln's executive order had done. And so Lincoln himself supported the 13th Amendment in early 1865. And the amendment became part of the United States Constitution, as we all know, in December 1865, followed by the 14th and 15th Amendments and the Civil Rights Bill of 1865, all to ensure that Juneteenth and freedom for the formerly enslaved men, women, and children throughout America would enjoy constitutional guarantees. But over the course of the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s and into the 20th century, dreams were deferred and even destroyed. By 1890, thousands of Blacks had migrated west, north, and even to Africa and Caribbean nations. By 1882, for the first time in the nation's history, statistics showed that most of the people lynched in the United States were Black men. Voter suppression legislation was the order of the day. The grandfather clause, poll tax, good moral character laws, and literacy tests reduced voting to a trickle by 1900. Jim Crow laws emerged in every Southern state. It indeed was a period that Dr. Rayford Logan referred to as the betrayal of the Negro. Betrayal by the federal government, betrayal by the United States Supreme Court, betrayal by the governments, and betrayal by the body of so-called white Christians in this country. And there were organized groups to ensure compliance by the new population of freed men and women. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866. The Knights of White Camellia, rifle associations were established across the South, and bands of unorganized criminals bent on maintaining the status quo. To a great extent, what we saw in 1870 and in 1871 in Alamance County, North Carolina, efforts to suppress the Black vote, we still see today. Much of what we saw yesterday, we still see today. The long lines we saw in Georgia just 3 days ago were efforts to suppress the vote. Efforts by the President of the United States and others across the country is not at all different than what occurred in North Carolina and especially throughout the South in the late 19th century. But in the face of Jim Crow laws, lynching, voter suppression, vagrancy laws, the Black codes, and racial terror in general, we must always look at how Black folk responded to their condition. They established an organized church system that is still in place today. They voted in large numbers and elected individuals who served in the state legislatures, helped to write state constitutions. They sent men to the United States House of Representatives and to the US Senate. They founded schools at every level, from elementary to the college level. Our institutions of higher education today, which were established immediately after emancipation, Fisk in 1865, Shaw in 1865, Howard in 1867. Fayetteville State University, 1867. Hampton, 1869. Johnson C. Smith, 1871. A&T, 1891. NCCU, 1910, and more than 100 other historically Black colleges and universities educated and continue to educate thousands and thousands of Black minds. They have produced graduates at the baccalaureate, master's and doctoral levels, and lawyers and doctors who attended these institutions practice throughout the United States today. This institutional and organizational formation included banks, insurance companies, funeral homes, grocery stores, beauty salons, barbershops, and hundreds of other businesses. By 1900, there were 20,000 Black-owned businesses in the United States. 14 years later, in 1914, it doubled to nearly 40,000 Black-owned businesses in this country. Fraternal organizations emerged. Cultural and educational organizations were established. The North Carolina Teachers Association was founded in 1881. An organization of Black teachers, it was one of the most influential educator groups in the United States. It merged with the North Carolina Education Association in 1970. Freedom continues to come with a huge, huge price. And it should be our duty, it is our duty. And definitely we should continue this struggle to ensure that what happened on June 19th, 1865, never leaves us. But we continue to ensure that it becomes a reality in every aspect of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker, for your timely remarks. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for continuing to teach and just shining that light, on our history. I also want to thank the Black electeds of Orange County for today. I truly believe that our predecessors are proud of us and looking on us and just really being pleased for what we're doing here as it relates to governance in Orange County. And last but certainly not least, my folks at the town of Carrboro Parks and Recreation Department, specifically the director, Anita Jones-McNair, and Charles Harrington, for all your help in putting this together. And hope everybody enjoys it. And I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to say, Commissioner Price or anyone else at this time before we close out.
I'll just say thank you to everyone and celebrate freedom.